All right, welcome to another podcast episode. I'm going to be doing something a little bit differently this time. And I decided, since I am working on research for my dissertation, I'm going through these Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher newspapers. Though that was the newspaper that was started to promote harmonial philosophy, and really to promote the book Principles of Nature. And so there's bits from Andrew Jackson Davis's mediumship demonstrations, and then there are testimonials from some others of the Harmonian movement who sort of attest to Andrew Jackson Davis's, let's say, genius, or I guess his authenticity as a medium in connecting with the spirits of Swedenborg and others, and then showing forth these revealed truths from the spirit realm. Okay, so the Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher newspaper was started. Actually, it's one of the key things that sort of connects Fourierism, the utopian socialist movement based on the teachings of Charles Fourier, the idea of the 12 passions, and that society should be governed around those 12 passions, to the emerging spiritualist movement, which, didn't really become a big popular movement until after the Civil War. But really, 1848 is usually seen as the turning point. But I would really say after the Civil War was kind of when popular spiritualism took over and harmonial spiritualism had sort of faded out by that time. So the first edition of the Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher newspaper, Volume 1, Number 1, is from December 4th, 1847. So at the very end of 1847. And this is William M. Fernald, who was also part of, I think it was the Wisconsin Phalanx, which was a Fourierist utopian community attempt at putting Fourier's works into practice. So this is the first piece from William Fernald, who was an editor of the Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher.
The Principles of Nature. The necessity for new and higher revelations, inspirations, or forms of truth for the benefit of mankind at the present day by W.M. Fernald. By the term revelation, I do not mean any supernatural or miraculous communication from God to man. In treating this subject, I do not exclude those influxes of superior wisdom from the divine mind, or from a higher sphere of human existence, which in all ages have characterized the minds of many distinguished men. But I do not understand by revelation any miraculous communication whatever. With this explanation, I turn to the necessity, at the present day, of a higher form of truth than any generally promulgated, even in Christian nations. Let me first speak of the form of truth, before I consider its necessity. All must acknowledge that the germs or principles of truth are naturally implanted in nearly every human mind. Systems and theories are wrought out only by the expansion of these principles. Even Christ revealed no entirely new principle of morals or religion. Most, if not all, of his precepts can be found among the heathen philosophers. Jesus showed his wisdom in selecting the wheat from the chaff, embodying in his life and teachings only the good from the varied and conflicting sentiments that abounded among men. He expanded these into a nobler life and higher teaching than any before or since, in morals and religion. Yet he did not attempt to philosophize on the nature of God, immortality, the structure of the universe, or the organization of society. It is often said that Jesus showed his dignity as a divinely inspired teacher by not reasoning on these matters, by simply announcing truth and trusting in its power. But is not that inspiration higher which can both announce and prove the truth by a course of philosophical and convincing reasoning? Especially since reason, no less than intuition and moral perception, is among the highest faculties of the human mind. This age demands such inspiration. Never since the Reformation has spiritual authority been so questioned, and never have science and philosophy so flourished. Skepticism abounds regarding the supernatural. In the most enlightened regions, where theology and philosophy are cultivated most, there also does skepticism prevail most. If in Christ's age, inspiration that addressed the affections and intuitions of men was most suited, this is the age that demands an appeal to reason. There are now multitudes of noble-minded men whose faculties extend beyond former proofs of immortality or divine truth. Their reason strains toward the center and source of all truth. Some have glimpsed the light, others still sigh in darkness, their former lights having become shadows. To such, the need for new and higher inspirations is evident. This is no disparagement of Jesus. He stands at the head of the human race in morals and religion. Yet as he did not attempt to explain the highest truths of God, immortality, or the organization of society, those powers which can do so forcibly and convincingly must be allowed a higher inspiration in this respect. The first necessity for new revelation is a truer idea of God. A true conception of God is the basis of all reasoning on nature, morals, and religion. Yet men are miserably blind. They strive to conceive a being separate from nature, calling him spirit, defined as a substance without form, parts, or extension. This is a definition of nothing. If spirit has no form or parts, then it is annihilated in thought. Such definitions leave us in the dark about who or where God is, or how he operates in nature. Hence the necessity of higher inspirations, to preserve faith and to feed the mind as well as the heart. Reason demands its hold on God, as much as affection does. Without such knowledge, unbelief grows, and indeed has settled on many. Here lies the necessity for new revelations, not to destroy faith, but to nourish and enlarge it. Nor is this meant to dishonor the Bible. That venerable book preserves the life and character of Jesus, the sublimest teacher of religion and morality. But it does not attempt to explain the structure of the universe, the mode of God's existence, or the principles of social organization. For these, we must turn to other sources. Among them is the great work of Andrew Jackson Davis, The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations, and A Voice to Mankind. Whatever its errors, it contains more truth systematized, reasoned, and expanded than any other single book in the world. It is as truly a revelation as any given to mankind. Here we find a truer conception of God, not as a being separate from nature, but as intimately united with it. Here too we find a rational account of creation, not as matter made from nothing, but as an unfolding of eternal substance. The foundation of supernaturalism, that God created matter out of nothing, falls away, for this is a contradiction, a miracle impossible. A truer view of nature banishes the blinding influence of supernaturalism, which has obstructed spiritual progress. This need extends to the subject of inspiration and the Bible itself. The canon of Scripture was formed by uninspired counsels, by men using only their natural judgments. If they could reject some manuscripts, why may we not question others? Their authority was human, not divine. Thus many, seeing this, fall into skepticism. To preserve faith, we need a higher form of truth that confirms inspiration without resort to miracle. Finally, the necessity is greatest regarding the organization of society. Look around, the poor crushed by unequal power, talent misplaced, virtue in garrets while vice thrives, innocence driven to prostitution by injustice, wealth elevating the unworthy. All of society exists in antagonism and disorder. Many noble spirits have sighed for some remedy. The principle of association, founded in nature, offers it. Charles Fourier discerned this principle in the harmony of the cosmos and applied it to human society. Andrew Jackson Davis, through correspondences and analogies, has delivered a grander vision still, pointing the way to social reorganization. We stand in a diseased world, but the dawn of a better morning is rising. Out of the chaos of the present will emerge a brighter order of justice, industry, and spiritual joy. This is prophecy, but it is also reason. New revelations are not only desirable but necessary for faith, for knowledge, for society, for humanity's hope.
All right, so in this inaugural piece from the Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher, Fernald, William Fernald, I think was involved in the Ceresco phalanx in Wisconsin from reports that I've seen. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more. But something interesting that came up when I was looking into the Ceresco phalanx again is Warren Chase, who appears in the Utopia, Ohio situation with John Waddles, when John Waddles, a former, actually not Fourierist, but a communitist, along John Anderson Collins's beliefs, which were a little bit more connected to maybe Owenism, which was more communistic than Fourierism, which was sort of a balance between market and socialism. So again, Warren Chase, involved in the Excelsior spiritualist community, involved in the Ceresco phalanx, and also became a Wisconsin and California state senator. So an important person in a lot of this. Free Soil Party gubernatorial candidate for Wisconsin. So, an important person in a lot of aspects, but again, Fourierism and harmonious spiritualism, very important in this man's life. So, but returning to Fernald, who was a phalangist along with Chase at the Ceresco phalanx, if my assumption is right. So he starts out with the talk about Jesus, and that Jesus' principles were certainly true. That he was a revelator of new truths that had not been revealed before. So, should we accept new revelations? Absolutely, we should. It's interesting he uses the term appeal to reason, because that would later become a socialist newspaper that actually considered a lot, or that actually contained a lot of new thought ideas and new thought writers wrote for, and in fact, I think even the editor at a time of the Appeal to Reason at a time was both a new thought figure and a socialist. And today, we see these two philosophies, the sort of get-rich-quick self-help philosophy, and the socialist idea as sort of mutually exclusive, sort of contradictory to each other, but in the early 19th century, they certainly did not see that as the case. In fact, this is something I'm getting at in the New Thought Liberation Theology piece that I'm working on, that indeed, early New Thought thinkers believed that their concept of a God that was omnipresent and omnipowerful actually harmonized quite well with the idea of socialism, the cooperative commonwealth. So I thought that was interesting. Another thing he says in this piece that's really interesting is he says being has become separate from nature, and we've created this category of spirit to say it's supernatural. But he says it's not supernatural, it's just natural, right? Spiritualists don't believe in supernaturalism. They don't believe in paranormalism, because these forces are not supernatural. They are not paranormal. They are very much natural and normal. So that's an important distinction that he makes. And then Fernald talks a little bit about the Bible. He talks about, going back to the discussion of Jesus, that the Bible is a true document, that the gospel account of Jesus' life is absolutely true, but it is incomplete. And so, and he says, we should not accept these ancient manuscripts as the gospel truth necessarily, but we should question them. So he promotes the principles of nature as sort of a supplement to the Bible. Again, this brings to mind some similar ideas that were happening at the time, and also a little bit earlier when it comes to, well, I guess earlier it would be Muhammad and the Quran, which was yet another, testament that's meant to supplement the Bible, to be another, story of the last prophet, Muhammad. And then also the LDS, of course, Joseph Smith receiving the plates from Moroni, ancient and Mormon, his father Mormon, the ancient American historian. And then this is another testament, another gospel of Jesus Christ. So again, not supernaturalism, but naturalism, and they very much saw this as scientific philosophy. So I was reflecting on my own research philosophy, and it is a bit somewhat inspired by the Harmonians and also by the Swedenborgians, in this belief that a scientific exploration of the spirit realm is possible. And I have been called woo-woo, I have been called kooky by the academic community for that. But I think that reflects an unfairness not only to those who try to interject spiritual science into academic discourse today, but also to the spiritualists, because there's this assumption that the spiritualists were woo-woo, that they were kooky, and I don't think that's true at all. They were absolutely scientific, and they claim to be scientific in their explorations of the spirit realm. We could talk about, sort of the UB study of the Fox sisters and all that. A little bit further, but again, just because the Fox sisters were exposed as frauds doesn't mean that spirit science is, absolutely beyond the pale. Fernald ends with the importance of reorganization of society, and especially what I noticed was reorganization of industry. So he's making a socialist appeal, and that's what a lot of the Fourier socialists said about the Harmonians, is that the principles they talk about are true wherever they come from, whether they come from spirits or they come from Swedenborg's ghost or whoever they claim that they come from, Ben Franklin or whatever. That doesn't matter so much as the principles themselves. And the principles themselves, the Fouriers found to be true. The next section is a series of definitions or poems by Samuel Byron Britton, series of definitions written in verse by Samuel Byron Britton, a former Episcopalian who turned to Universalism. He actually housed Davis and his mesmerist, at the time, Lion, at his Manhattan boarding house at 32 Green Street in New York. And then he left from New York City to Albany to lead a Universalist congregation. Through Britain, Lion and Davis met Fishbaugh, again, a young Universalist minister, who would become Andrew Jackson Davis's scribe for his Principles of Nature revelations.
Definitions. Love, the incense of heaven. Faith, the flame that burns to purify. Justice, the equilibrium of the universe. Labor, the dungeon of the spirit. Prudence, the caution nerve of virtue. Despair, the midnight of the soul. Life, the atmosphere of the infinite mind. Power, the airy vehicle of passion and sentiment. Common sense, the shears used to clip the wings of genius. Revenge, the fire that consumes the altar with the sacrifice. Pain, the sentinel employed by wisdom to defend the citadel of the soul. Money, a root of evil not found in an editor's garden. SBB, Samuel Byron Britton.
So I like how he ends it with money, a root of evil not found in the editor's garden. I think he is referring to perhaps himself or his harmonian comrades who are working on principles of nature and their money woes at the time. Now, in New Thought, we kind of see money a little bit differently, not as a root of evil, but as a mechanism to get things that we want and need, but also that it is correct in the scripture that says love of money is the root of all evil. That is the emphasis on outward things to the neglect of the kingdom of heaven, which is within you. Really, our economic outlook should be guided by our devotion to the kingdom of heaven, which is our inward voice of reason. Oh, and now we come to a sort of major centerpiece of this newspaper, which is Andrew Jackson Davis's piece, Seek and Ye Shall Find.
Voices from the Mountain. Seek and You Shall Find. By A.E.J. Davis. An earnest desire for wisdom, for truth, for knowledge of human life and destiny, of goodness, of human wisdom, moves me to utterance. The deep fountain of my being, freed from mortality, flows forth strong and glowing. Its melody is interwoven in the acknowledgement of no time nor space, for both are lost in its already eternal life, and in its far-reaching aspirations. Thus it has grown clear, great and strong, and, moved by it, I seek an introduction to, and a more intimate acquaintance with, the world of life and change, joy and sorrow, error and truth, discord and harmony. Like other men I live, and pass from the interior, or world of causes, to the exterior, or world of effects. Yet my state is unlike that of some men, for I feel a closer relation to a peculiar mental state or medium which it is my intention to naturalize and elucidate. To prejudge, or carelessly misinterpret, is manifestly unkind. The reader should be watchful for the detection of error, if error there be, and for the recognition of truth, if truth there be, and thus proceed understandingly. Innumerable combinations of matter are prepared to constitute the human organization. A vast congregation of subtle forces act upon, and elaborate, the master structure for their own specific purpose and form of action. And the elements of man, like those of all other things, have strong inherent tendencies to advance, in regular series, to the development of a perfect unity. Therefore there are successive and complete systems in man's physical plan and correspondingly in his mental structure. Thus we have the osseous, which consists of the bones, the cartilaginous, which unites each joint, the glandular, which procreates and performs all secretion, the muscular, which serves to promote and govern locomotion, the nervous, which conveys impressions to, and mandates from, the brain, the vascular, which embraces the arteries and veins, and the cellular tissues, which penetrate, interlace, and connect the whole. Each one, considered by itself, is perfect, but considered in relation to others, each forms only a part, and is imperfect. There is also a mutual confidence in each other's integrity, and a mutual dependence upon each other's just discharge of office. Moreover, each lower, and the lowest system, is subservient and subject to the government of each higher, and the highest, insomuch that there is, by mutual consent, a constant reception and impartation of influence and power. To consider man in relation to his form is our next step. Man is endowed with power to love, or desire, to perceive and conceive, to compare and decide, to will and to act. His love, or desiring power, diffuses an influence throughout the countless avenues of his being. Its influence before birth perfects the osseous and kindred substances, and is only manifested in performing the functions of creative motion. But immediately after the fulfillment of its mission in this department, it tends to the development of higher systems, the muscles, nerves, and cellular tissues, and thus becomes creative life. Furthermore, after birth, motion and life ascend and diffuse themselves upon each clothing membrane, and become creative sensation, and not only establish a more intimate connection in man than man, but connect him with matter out of himself, and with all things. But his will, or executive power, has good ways and means of action, as also has his wisdom innumerable mediums of manifestation. Thus it is plain that the matter composing the body is not only elaborated by, but is at all times under the vital government of, and spiritual influence from, its animating principle. And thus man typifies and corresponds to the vast and universal system which is enlivened, actuated, and governed by a supreme spiritual mover, the Father. There is an infinite variety of men. Impressed on every man, more or less, are the peculiar characteristics of his immediate progenitors. Thus each man has certain apparently fixed predispositions, which incline him to the identical pursuits and habits of thought, and give him all the strongly marked characteristics for which his parents were distinguished. Circumstances of birth, society, and culture are no less engaged in forming, deforming, or reforming the man, yet, running through all these, can be seen the direction and peculiarity of hereditary character. And to whatever direction this may tend, that way will each power and faculty incline, and thus go on to some extreme point, where a complete phenomenon will be presented. In some instances we find the barren idiot, in others, the fertile philosopher. Hence we have had, and have now, men celebrated for almost stupendous talents in certain departments, such as mechanics, mathematics, poetry, astronomy, and general philosophy. When we read or hear of men having any of these powers remarkably developed, or witness them in their moments of manifestation, we are impressed to refer them to supernatural agencies. But when we search deeper, they declare themselves as merely outbursts and legitimate consequences of causes distinctly obvious. We have thus briefly viewed man's material structure, its particular self-dependence, its entire subjection to the internal principle, the mutual relationship of its various parts, and his spiritual attributes, in this his first and rudimental state. We come now to consider man in another, and higher condition, viz., the sympathetic or somnambulic. Numerous indeed are the causes that may be engaged in producing this elevation. The body and mind may be constitutionally inclined to enter it, or long-continued corporeal disturbances may render the nervous system highly susceptible to foreign or mental influences, and these, when actively engaged while the system is in a favorable state of health and temperature, will terminate in producing double consciousness. Disease has, not unfrequently, refined and subtilized the body to such a degree, that individuals have had protracted visions in trances. And sometimes a simple accident or injury has resulted in the production of the same phenomenon. In fact, anything, whether constitutional or accidental, tending to refine and spiritualize the organization, or to improve the habits, the manners and life, may be instrumental in the production of somnambulism. In this state, the body is partially under the control of the mind, and partially subject to the direction of surrounding influences. If mostly controlled by the mind, the constitutional predisposition will be exhibited. The person may present astonishing developments of physical and mental powers, such as he may be distinguished for a while in the ordinary state, or new faculties may manifest themselves. Generally the person will set out some ruling inclination differently, and with greater force, according to attending circumstances, for to them and their unseen influences should be attributed the numerous modifications of mind while in the peculiar state supposed. But if the person be controlled mostly by surrounding influences, he will write, speak, sing, weep, laugh, configurate his body, and present many symptoms of monomania. At such times the body and mind will perform what predominating impressions suggest, and will also constantly evince a consciousness of all outer or interposing objects, thoughts, and desires. Again, if constitutional and accidental causes be not adequate to the production of this state, then the regular and repeated influence of a second person will produce the requisite degree of corporeal refinement, and consequently the somnambulic state. In this case a unity of desire and intention between the persons is indispensable, and their mental structures must be as dissimilar as our positive and negative poles. Then a spiritual galvanic action will ensue. The negative body will yield, and a channel of communication will be opened between them, as between two persons conversing through the mediums of hearing and speech. The agent by which this has been frequently accomplished has been called animal magnetism, but I feel impressed to consider it a spiritual intercourse through the organism, resulting in a definition of relative physical powers and mental capacity. Another class of results frequently follows this condition. Having his spiritual perceptions enlarged and improved, the individual can read another's memory, can relate circumstances of youth, describe distant scenes, revive, and clothe in beautiful language half-remembered thoughts and long-cherished opinions entertained by those in his immediate presence. He can, also, speak of and describe absent friends, whether in or out of the body, in proportion to that accuracy with which they are defined and represented in the memory, and sometimes he can give philosophic and scientific dissertations. In truth, the subject can separate or combine every thought or predilection pervading the mental atmosphere of the room occupied. Indeed, well-attested instances are recorded in which the semi-clairvoyant employed Latin, Greek, and Hebrew words, and even passages, with perfect ease and correctness, concerning which, in his natural state, he had no knowledge. Ask persons in this state respecting disease, and they will describe and confirm the patient's pre-impressions, differing only in the selection of terms and diction, which is customary with individuals in all conditions. Ask them to reveal their source of information, and they will refer to spiritual influx, prophetic power, complicated mediums of sight, tales of ancient marvels, and all manner of consistent and inconsistent explanations will be given. In most cases, however, the subject will repeat acquired opinions, or those unconsciously entertained by the operator or assemblage. And while these explanations are being given, the simple causes of the phenomena escape the perceptions of men, and long investigations are required to disrobe the occurrences of the false facts and principles with which they become clothed. Manifestations while in this state are dissimilar, according to surrounding and invisible causes, and whether truths or falsities are uttered, no practitioner is authorized to claim for his subject a vision independent of his own, or of contiguous minds and influences, for this is the transition state, through which the mind must pass to attain a clearer discernment, a greater capacity, and a higher elevation. The independent, or clairvoyant state, is seldom attained. Those causes which produce diversities of form, mind, and talent, in the rudimental and transition states, must all be favorable to its development. Peculiar mental and physical qualifications are indispensable. An easy, healthy mind, simple and correct habits of diet, a calm, growing knowledge of, and confidence in, God, a desire for refinement and goodness, a clear perception and full appreciation and practice of benevolence and justice, and a desire for spiritual association, are necessary qualifications to enable one to mount this mental eminence. And as circumstances of birth, society, education, temperament, organization, and habits are, in most cases, unfavorable, but few individuals gain this position. Indeed, it has been intimated that but 1 in 75 million of the Earth's inhabitants are capable at one time of entering this state. And sound, authoritative reason everywhere concedes the point that it is a condition in which many prophets, poets, and philosophers were while communicating truths, principles, and prophecies far in advance of their age and education. There are two sets of causes engaged in the production of clairvoyance. That of submitting to congenial and frequent manipulations. This tends to tranquilize and concentrate the mind, also renders it susceptible of gentle influences through the organization. In this case, the body is held to life by the operator, of whose native body it then becomes a passive member, and the spirit is held to its form by sensation, which at other times connects it with objects of the external world. And with this transferration of the perceptive medium, the external memory is closed, and the internal opened, whereby the individual can, from time to time, remember all things heard and seen while in, but not out of, that condition. After being rendered thus susceptible, then, as in the other case, if immediate conditions are favorable, the state of the mind, health, and atmosphere, the body will yield to temporary death, and the spirit will dwell in a world of causes. In this case the spirit resides, transitionally, in and out of the form, at the same time. And, in consequence of this intercourse between sensation and thought, between the body and mind, the interior slides into external memory, wherefore the individual can recollect when out, what was felt, seen, and heard while in the state. In the ordinary condition, the spirit is compelled to remain in, and see from, its bodily location, but in the state now described, the spirit is empowered to make voyages of discovery, and go where desire, impregnated with good and truth, may create a central attraction. As this state is the highest, and comprehends all below it, it should be called the superior condition, for the terms normal, abnormal, mesmerism, magnetism, pathotism, somnambulism, sympathy, and clairvoyance, are indefinite, as well as insignificant of the various states of mind they are used to represent. The reader is requested to remember this classification, as I feel impressed to employ no other in subsequent articles. The spirit in the superior condition is not influenced by acquired or prevalent ideas and prejudices. Like a man in the form, walking, searching, and inquiring, the spirit goes forth in search of that wherewith its desires may be gratified. The real man then enters a new field of investigation, uttering and confirming that which men have written and believed, if true, revealing fresh and vaster principles, if useful, denouncing and removing long-cherished opinions, if unfounded, suggesting deeper, higher, and more expansive plans to instruct and harmonize society, and if the faculties are all equally developed, will make every demonstration necessary and profitable for mankind. In all ages men have grown to this condition. The simplicity of Christ, his purity of mind, his gentleness and wisdom, power of prophecy, freeness of principles, and propriety of deportment, all testify of his mental growth. And Swedenborg declares that he himself entered this condition. Its truth no one will doubt, when acquainted with his immense social, scientific, and philosophical superstructure, presenting at once a condensation and amplification of all previously ascertained truth. A multitude of testimonies might be produced in illustration and confirmation of these general views, but we must pass them, and impress the following conclusions. That, as all things in each department act with, for, and upon each other, the term independence is insignificant, and that, as there are diversities of constitution, so there are diversities, as says a well-known writer, of gifts, and diversities of operations, or causes and results, and that all are, in some degree, susceptible of, and developed toward, the superior condition. 2. That as the mediatorial state is a passive one, so truths or falsities in that state may be uttered, and that, consequently, to one is given the word of knowledge, or acquired opinion's winky face. To another divers kinds of tongues, as active surrounding influences may determine, hence that their sayings have no weight or importance. 3. That, as the superior condition is a development of every spiritual power, the subjugation of every animal propensity, and the bringing of the real man into immediate conjunction with spirits, causes, and principles, we may rely upon the affirmation that, to one is given the word of wisdom or intuition winky face. To another, the gift of healing, to another, prophecy, to another, the discerning of spirits, to another, the interpretation of tongues. And therefore, that the disclosures of this state have great weight, and demand serious and deep consideration. It may not be unprofitable here to relate a brief account of my own early experiences in this direction. From my youth up, I was strongly impressed with peculiar feelings, which led me to commune much with myself. These feelings were generally most powerful in the stillness of nature, or when I was retired from the society of others. They frequently urged me to wander into the forests, and there indulge in long and solitary meditations. When about 14 years of age, I was the subject of several extraordinary manifestations, both physical and mental. At times, I was impressed to speak upon subjects concerning which, in my ordinary condition, I was totally ignorant, and occasionally I was constrained to utter predictions, some of which were literally fulfilled. I was also, at times, impressed to prescribe remedies for the sick, and in many cases with remarkable success. In the year 1843, I became acquainted with the science of mesmerism. I soon discovered that I was peculiarly susceptible to its influence, and frequently passed into profound states of somnambulism. While in these conditions, my mind seemed entirely released from the body, and to possess powers of perception and knowledge far transcending those of my natural state. I could describe, with minuteness and accuracy, the diseases of patients, and prescribe the proper remedies for their cure. My perceptions of absent persons and places were also clear and distinct. But these were only the beginnings of greater things. In the year 1844, while walking in the fields one evening, I was suddenly entranced. A sphere of light appeared before me, and I seemed to be surrounded by an atmosphere of glory. In the midst of this light stood two forms, one of whom I immediately recognized as the great Swedish philosopher, Emanuel Swedenborg, the other was the ancient Greek physician, Galen. They spoke to me words of encouragement, and declared that I was chosen to promulgate important truths to the world. They told me that I should be the instrument of revealing to mankind the laws of the spiritual world, and of reconciling them with those of the natural. This vision made an indelible impression upon my mind. From that hour, I felt that a new destiny was opening before me. Soon after this, I began to experience frequent and powerful impressions to speak in public. I obeyed these impressions, though often with reluctance, and I was astonished at the thoughts and language which flowed from my lips. In the year 1845, I was impressed to remove from Poughkeepsie to the city of New York. Here my mediumistic powers became more fully developed. I was frequently entranced in the presence of friends, and delivered discourses upon philosophical, scientific, and theological subjects, entirely beyond the reach of my natural education or capacity. In November of that year, I was impressed to dictate a work to the world. Accordingly, I commenced delivering, while in the superior condition, a series of lectures which were written down by a competent stenographer. These discourses, continuing through many months, were afterwards published under the title of Nature's Divine Revelations, and a Voice to Mankind. In these lectures I endeavored to unfold, in systematic order, the laws of nature and of spirit, as they were revealed to my perceptions in the exalted condition into which I was introduced. During the period of these dictations, I was often raised into states of ineffable illumination. A flood of light would seem to descend upon me, clothing my spirit with unspeakable glory. My mind expanded with a power and clearness beyond description. I seemed to dwell, not in the body, but in the midst of spiritual realities. Principles, causes, and laws stood revealed before me with a distinctness surpassing all language. At such times I felt that I was but an instrument in the hands of higher intelligences, through whom eternal truths were made manifest. Since that period, I have continued to receive impressions and instructions in similar states. I have been frequently led to speak and write upon themes of philosophy, science, and religion, concerning which my natural education had given me no knowledge. I have also been the subject of many interior experiences and visions, too numerous and sacred to be here related. I am therefore constrained to testify, from my own consciousness, to the reality of those exalted conditions of which I have spoken. I know that man is capable of entering states in which he perceives truths that transcend the reach of his ordinary faculties. I know that the spirit is not confined to the narrow prison of the body, but that it may, even while here, rise into communion with higher spheres of existence, and receive light and wisdom from those who dwell therein. Let not the reader, therefore, doubt the reality of the superior condition. It is no dream, no delusion, but a solemn and sublime reality, destined to exert a mighty influence upon the future development of mankind. It is the opening of a new dispensation of light, in which the natural and the spiritual are to be united, science and religion reconciled, and man restored to his true position as a child of God and an heir of immortality.
Alright, so I don't even know if you find this interesting or not, but this is a little bit into the mind of the researcher, how historians, religious studies scholars process primary sources. And so maybe this will be interesting to you. So there's actually a lot I get out from this piece. So having read Principles of Nature, which is much longer and much more detailed, this piece is a much more concise spiritual biography than what's found in Principles of Nature, and a more concise explanation of the superior state, which in Principles, or in, I think it's the Magic Staff, maybe, he includes a chart of the different mesmeric states, which is very helpful. But I find this to be a pretty good defense of the superior state, sort of a rhetorical defense in the, sort of Enlightenment rationalist tradition. He starts out by talking about watchful detection of error, and he says, by all means, look into my philosophy, look into my methods, and try to find error. So he is embracing skepticism here. He's embracing the questioning of things. Also, another thing that I argue is that he is a critical, enchanted materialist. Well, here's the critical part, right? The ruthless critique of everything. That's sort of what critical theory is based on from Marx. And here he's doing it. He's saying, while Marx would say critical exploration of everything or something along those lines, maybe I'm not getting that quote quite right, but here Davis says watchful detection of error. So sounds very similar to that basis for critical theory. He uses the body as a metaphor for society to talk about interdependence, right? Each of the systems in the body, the immune system, the circulatory system, the excretory system, the reproductive system, all these systems, nervous system most importantly, all these systems are perfect on their own. But when you look at them in the whole, they are interdependent, and so by themselves imperfect. He then goes on to talk about man's desire. This, again, sounds similar to Charles Fourier's idea of the passions, of attractive labor, that labor should be organized around human passions. And importantly, I think this is a very important point to make here, and this is where I differ from a lot of the scholars on spiritualism, is that spiritualism was not an individualistic philosophy. It was very far from being individualistic. Davis echoes Robert Owen's earlier conjecture that man's character is formed for them, not by them. I have a quote from him on my calendar today. It says, "Happiness of self can only be attained by conduct that must promote the happiness of the community." So related to that truism, person's character is formed for them, not by them. So importantly, Davis's philosophy is far, far from individualistic. He says man is a product of influences, of impressions from the world and from the spirits, but it is not, yes, we have free will, but it is not in conditions of our own choosing, as Marx said. Men make their own history, but not in conditions of their own choosing. So he anticipated that argument by several decades. Maybe not, actually, because Marx was sort of already making those arguments around the time Communist Manifesto was a year later, 1848, so where he criticizes Fourier, criticizes Robert Owen, so some of the influential people on American socialism. He talks about disease and accidents, and this is actually an interesting section, and in New Thought and some of the earlier permutations of New Thought in Christian Science from Mary Baker Eddy, and earlier Quimbyite, Phineas Quimby's mesmerism, we get the idea that disease comes from sin. But Davis argues differently, that actually sometimes disease and accidents may cause beneficial effects that open one up to the superior state. And then he talks about his difference with the mesmerist. He argues it's not an animal magnetism. The superior state is not so much a state of animal magnetism so much as a spiritual intercourse. And again, this is the anti-individualist part of it, right? It's in communion with spirit. So the individual is de-emphasized. In fact, enchantment means the individual sort of ceases to exist. The subject and object become one. He also recognizes, this is one of the things that Davis was criticized for, and especially and importantly, in the elements of his philosophy that reflected Swedenborgianism and Fourierism, which were very much connected. And one of his critics said, anytime the spirits tend to talk about ideas that get really close to Swedenborgianism, there's some kind of member of the Swedenborgian New Church or New Jerusalem Church. Then anytime the spirits start to talk about societal reforms that get really close to Fourierism, there's always a representative of Fourier, like Albert Brisbane. Well, fair enough, and Davis actually acknowledges this. He says there is unconscious influence of the attendees in the superior state. So the these psychic impressions from the people that are actually there, even if not participants, just witnesses, their psychic ideas get sort of combined in this psychic stew that he receives of impressions, what he calls impressions. So again, very much not individualist, right? Very much against individualism, in fact. All right, he says the qualifications for a person, he says only that actually 1 in 75 million in Earth's population tend to be able to get to the superior state. And he says the qualifications are a healthy mind, a belief in God, a desire for spiritual association. Again, we could say communion. I was thinking about this in relation to the book, Principles of Nature, and a lot of the philosophical ideas that Davis, I guess, was impressed to put forward, that Fishbaugh recorded. When things are written in Davis's own voice, as this piece appears to be, they tend to be about how to achieve the superior condition rather than the insights that are received there. And Davis claimed to not even remember really anything that he would say in the superior condition. He also importantly talks about how Swedenborg, there's reports that Swedenborg entered the superior condition. He had communion with spirits, and many of his revelations were resulted from that. He importantly says that independence does not exist. The term independence is insignificant. That's his word. The term independence is insignificant because one is influenced by the impressions one receives, both from civilization, from society. Civilization is Fourier's term. And from the spiritual world in Swedenborgian terms, right? Swedenborg talked about everything that happens to us in the earthly plane. It is mirrored, corresponds to struggles and things in the heavenly or spiritual plane. So again, importantly, the term independence is insignificant. And this does sort of come from sort of Owenite vibes. Then he talks about how, he gives this concise spiritual bio, a more concise spiritual biography than is included in Principles of Nature. Just very, the absolute highlights, the important points. But he says, from a young age, I had a tendency to want to commune with myself. I think that's a very important term, commune with myself. How do you commune with yourself, right? Because to commune means to become one with the other, right? For the subject and the object to sort of join together and become one. I've talked about how this is the definition of the enchanted experience. As Emerson says, in nature, I became a transparent eyeball. Jane Bennett argues, the more contemporary philosopher, that is a feeling of being wrested from one's familiar disposition and then being sort of one with all of creation. So he says, from a very young age, I was driven to commune with myself. And that's again the idea that looking within is not an individualist pursuit so much as a way of connecting to others, to the souls of others, and to the big capital O other, right, which is God. He also says he was impressed to speak in public. So it was not his own choice to become a public speaker. It was the spirits who were impressed upon him that this was his role, that he was called to put forth the principles of nature to society and to recommend a way to better society. This kind of relates to Weber's idea of how the Protestant concept of the calling led to the rise of capitalism. Weber says it was because of individualism and disenchantment, which obviously I am arguing the opposite of. It was collectivism and enchantment, not individualism and disenchantment. But still, that argument is relevant, that the Protestant idea of calling isn't in play here. The Lutheran, really Luther. And then he concludes by saying, from my own consciousness. So he gives a disclaimer that he's talking from his own subjectivity at that point. But he says consciousness is not confined to the body, and the superior state proves that dictum, that consciousness is not connected to the body. One can commune with spiritual forces larger than the individual. So again, this is an anti-individualist stand, not an individualist one. Okay, so the next piece in this newspaper is by Samuel Byron Britton, who I mentioned earlier. This is the piece that it was traditional for newspapers, actually maybe it's still traditional for newspapers, but especially in the 19th century, on their inaugural edition to include some sort of editorial indicating why they exist and what their editorial position is and what their sort of worldview and philosophy is. So this is that piece by Samuel Byron Britton, the Episcopalian minister turned Universalist turned harmonial spiritualist.
The Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher. S.B. Britton, editor, New York, Saturday, December 4, 1847. The Univercoelum. On opening this first number of a paper with the above unique title, the reader will very naturally inquire, what is the occasion of its institution? What are the objects to which it will aim? And what position will it assume in the world of thought? To these several questions brief answers may here be given. It cannot but be obvious to every attentive observer of the signs of the times that public feeling and modes of thought are gradually undergoing a most decided change. Humanity is beginning to awake from a long and death-like slumber of error and depression, and to aspire to a higher plane of thought and a more congenial social condition. Noble spirits, yearning to be free, have sounded the tocsin of rebellion against old hierarchies of superstition which have crushed to the earth the freeborn spirit of man, and the antiquated thrones of spiritual tyranny are trembling to their foundations. Human reason, long fettered by the chains of theological authority and immured in the dungeons of hereditary belief, is now beginning to arise from her depression and to assert her high prerogative. Mankind, laughing at the impotent denunciations of those whose interest it is to restrict their thoughts to the narrow circle of a creed, are rushing to the standard of free and unbounded investigation. Time-honored systems, falsely claiming the authority of divine sanction, can no longer conceal their utter inadequacy to meet the spiritual and social wants of man, and their hold upon the human affections is being gradually relaxed. What is truth, established, eternal, in the order of things, is a question beginning largely to engross the human mind, and the loud cries of philanthropy are pealing to the heavens for some grand and elevated system of thought and action, whose tendency will be to improve the condition of a suffering and unhappy race. These circumstances in the world of thought and feeling may be considered as the predisposing cause of the establishment of this journal. The great majority of existing journals and periodicals are either devoted to the interests of particular parties or sects, or pledged to an entire neutrality on questions of progress and reform which now agitate the public mind. It seems fitting, therefore, that a journal should be established wherein new truths may be presented and old errors exposed, wherein all subjects relating to the moral, social, and spiritual elevation of man may be freely discussed, irrespective of the religious, political, and social prejudices that exist in the world. The more immediate and exciting cause of the creation of this journal, however, also needs to be stated. It is well known to a large portion of the community that astounding developments are claimed to have recently taken place through the medium of what is commonly termed clairvoyance. An uneducated youth of 20 years, while in a strange abnormal state corresponding to physical death, and apparently having access to the knowledge familiar to a higher world of human existence, has given forth sayings and reasonings, now embodied in a large octavo volume, ranging over the whole circle of science, philosophy, and psychology. Descending to the origin of things, and tracing them gradually, naturally, and progressively to their consummation in the various spheres of spiritual existence on subjects of unspeakable interest heretofore veiled in impenetrable mystery, he has thrown, as it appears to us, a flood of clear and brilliant light. Of the all-comprehensive physical, social, and spiritual philosophy thus unfolded, the conductors of this journal have the profoundest appreciation. Without speaking further for the present, we believe that the eternal laws of nature, as unfolded and explained through the medium above referred to, constitute the sublime, unerring source of instruction now accessible, that they prescribe the only true and desirable social condition, and that they form a sufficient and reliable ground for the highest and holiest hopes of man, for time and for eternity. Appreciating, and rejoicing in, the light thus shed on our path, being inspirited by the transcendent truths thus unfolded to our minds, and feeling an irrepressible desire to have them widely known, enjoyed, and reduced to practice, we have fixed upon this print as one suitable instrument whereby we may labor for the attainment of these objects. But though the book entitled The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations, and A Voice to Mankind by Mr. Davis, the clairvoyant, is, as we confess, the immediate cause which has led to the creation of this journal, we would not be understood as receiving this or any other mere book as infallible authority in matters of faith and practice. To erect this or any other book as an infallible standard, and to bow slavishly to its teachings without boldly inquiring into their intrinsic propriety, would be at once to sacrifice the high prerogatives of reason and to do violence to those principles of free and unrestricted thought inculcated on almost every page of this very book. Mr. Davis's work, therefore, will be regarded as a light rather than as an authority, and whatever devotion we may manifest toward its teachings will be exhibited because those teachings commend themselves to our reason in a reliable form. The word Univercoelum, which we have selected as our title, means, literally translated, the united revolving heavens. It was coined by the youthful clairvoyant in the dictation of his wonderful book, and was used by him as significant of all things, terrestrial and celestial, existing in infinite space. We adopt this title, therefore, as an appropriate indication of the most expansive possible sphere of inquiry, and consistently with its import, we shall know no party save the whole human race, and no restriction of thought save that which is prescribed by the laws of nature in the capacities of the human mind. Our general position as to theology, morals, and spiritual and social science may now be briefly defined, allowing each writer the privilege of his own peculiar shades of belief, for which he will be individually responsible. The Univercoelum will, in its general tone and tendency, recognize the great supreme intelligence as the cause, nature as the effect, and the immortalized human spirit as the ultimate result, the three being united in the formation of one grand and harmonious system. The deity will be considered as an infinitely intelligent essence, not existing separately from the universe, but entering into, actuating, and vivifying all things, from the most ponderous globe to the infinitesimal particle of matter. This great essence will be regarded as an organized being, possessing faculties corresponding to those of man, only in an infinite degree, and as constituting the soul of which the material universe is the body. The infinite soul and infinite body are thus united, in the same way as the finite soul and finite body are united in the formation of man, and hence, according to an ancient record, man is created in God's own image. This great intelligent essence being the soul of nature, the laws of nature will be considered as the outward expressions of the will or thoughts of that soul, in the same way as the positions and movements of the human body are the expressions of the will or thoughts of the spirit within. And as body and soul form a harmonious unity, the former being the only existing medium through which the latter can act, we cannot recognize any external expression of the divine will or power as properly supernatural, that is, above or contrary to nature, for this would be a disturbance of the infinite and eternal unity, and would be no more consistent than it would be for God to lie. All phenomena, then, however mysterious or inexplicable, will be referred to some law, that is, to some eternal and unchangeable thought of the divine mind. It will be maintained that the thoughts of the deity expressed in nature's laws are of themselves infinitely perfect, requiring no change, but adequate to the production of all necessary results throughout all time and eternity. The most unbounded confidence, therefore, will be inculcated in the workings of nature's laws. Their teaching will be regarded with profound reverence, for through them, it will be maintained, the deity is constantly speaking to man and making known his will. The grand, general, and fundamental laws eternally established by the divine mind may be reduced to three, namely, association, progression, and development. Association is the assemblage or proximity of particles and substances, animate and inanimate, according to mutual affinities, from the constellations and solar systems of the expanded heavens, to the infinitesimal molecules composing the blade of grass or the eye of an insect. One phase of the same law has been termed gravitation. Progression is the constant tendency of all particles, substances, and compounds, animate and inanimate, to higher degrees of refinement. Development expresses the law by which all substances, in their onward progression, are constantly assuming forms or organisms suitable to contain their internal essence. These laws, with their various natural modifications, will be considered as applicable to the great human world as to all other departments of the universe. Association, therefore, according to mutual personal affinities, capacities, and qualifications, will be strenuously inculcated as the sine qua non of all harmony and happiness. Then, by a constant and gradual progression, we expect that there will be an ultimate development of a grand form or organism that will unite the whole human race as one vast brotherhood, as one grand man, of which every individual person is a necessary organ. This will be the establishment of the kingdom or government of heaven upon earth, and a realization of the prayer of that exalted teacher of old whom we delight to reverence as the perfect example of a perfect man. Though ages may elapse before this consummation shall have been fully attained, we shall consider no efforts to hasten its accomplishment, or to approach it day by day, as unavailing. The conductors of this journal have witnessed facts, and have had philosophical demonstrations, which place the great truths of immortality and of future, endless progression to them beyond all possible doubt. They will therefore labor to prove, illustrate, and rationalize these truths as occasion may require, ever realizing the indispensable importance of disseminating in the world a pure and expansive faith, and an ennobling and lofty spirituality. The 10,000 religious sects into which the world is now divided will be considered as so many strata in the great geology of the mental world, some occupying a lower, and some a higher, position, but all as yet comparatively gross and immature. Whatever of truth we may find in their opinions or in the teachings of their respective sacred books, we will receive and inculcate; whatever of error, we will reject and expose. Recognizing the thoughts and intentions of the divine mind expressed through the laws of nature as the basis of the only true teachings, our diligent efforts shall be to discover, elucidate, and inculcate those laws as the only true basis of individual and social action and policy. The law of consequences, promotive or destructive of human peace, as naturally resulting from actions according as they are good or evil, will be strenuously insisted upon. These consequences, certain and unavoidable, will be considered as the only rewards and punishments which justice can award to human action. Laboring, as we shall, to elevate society to a purely natural basis on which all the human faculties and passions may be enjoyed according to the dictates of a well-developed wisdom, we shall be obliged to assume an antagonism to all artificial laws, customs, and modes of thought and feeling existing both in the social and religious world. All superstition, bigotry, and religious intolerance, and all sanguinary and arbitrary legal enactments, shall find in our columns an uncompromising opposition. All unjust customs and conditions relating to industrial movements will be exposed and denounced, and we shall labor diligently to elevate the degraded and downtrodden, wherever found, to that dignity which all human beings should sustain. Rooted in the stronghold of reason, and animated by the spirit of love, we shall not be diverted from our course by denunciations or persecutions which we are aware will be poured out upon us without mixture and without measure. If we stand upon eternal truth, the storms of sedition can only rage beneath us, but cannot harm us. Appeals to reason, coming from opponents, will always meet with candid and respectful consideration, while calumny and slander we shall leave to operate on the low minds for which they are intended. The Univercoelum will therefore be devoted to general inquiry in philosophy, theology, and to an exposition and vindication of the principles of nature in their application to individual and social life. political, social, and religious movements which may seem to have a bearing upon the great interests of man will be, irrespective of party considerations, noticed and commented upon as occasion may suggest. Facts and principles relative to physiology and general medical science shall receive due attention. Particular prominence will be given to such occurrences and phenomena as may be of interest in the departments of animal magnetism, clairvoyance, and general psychology. A department of the paper will also be devoted to the record of such items of intelligence as may be deemed of general interest. Mr. A. J. Davis will, from time to time, give forth his spiritual intuitions in our columns. Thus planned and concerted, the Univercoelum earnestly asks of a truth-seeking public that patronage which its editors hope, by diligent effort, to deserve. We have above given a brief declaration of the principles by which our columns will, at present, be governed. It should be distinctly stated, however, that in the progressive unfolding of truths and circumstances, any modifications of these principles which may hereafter seem requisite shall promptly be made. Truth shall ever be our highest and all-engrossing object, and from a pursuit of this we trust we may never be diverted by any attachment to an arbitrary system. The editors of the Univercoelum.
All right, so let's run down what is Samuel Byron Britton talking about in this passage. So first of all, we'll talk about the purpose of the newspaper is to promote the Principles of Nature book. And I'm not sure what the price differential is on that, but I imagine the newspaper was cheaper than the book. And then the newspaper contains teasers from Davis that will offer, what you might expect to see were you to buy the book, Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations, and A Voice to Mankind, which is really 3 books, right? So 3 for the price of 1, great. So this is the marketing aspect of the market revolution. So in the we'll say teens to the 40s, when this is written, this is the period that we know of as the market revolution, when there are a lot of changes in the American political economy taking place, and the market now becomes sort of the new definer of value. And commodities become a thing. Commodities are defined by the price that they can be bought or sold at the market. So we can see from this how the logic of the market revolution even influenced the socialist movements at the time, and harmonial spiritualism. Fourierism, again, was a joint stock system, so people could buy into it, they could invest in it, but then also the people that labored under the system were said to have equal ownership with those who invested. So it's an amalgamation of capitalism and socialism taking place under the associationist joint stock system. And again, in this piece, Britton talks about association. He also talks about the concept of combination. He talks about 3 forces in historical development, and these include association, progression, and development. The latter 2 could be said to be Whiggish ideas from the American Whig Party, which Horace Greeley, who was a Fourierist, was a part of, and tried to incorporate Fourierist ideas into the broader Whig Party platform. And then the first one, association, is very clearly Fourierist. The Fourierists called their philosophy associationism. Okay. He then talks about the manifestation of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Which again, the kingdom of heaven, going back to, really Jesus, but even like the Russian philosopher Tolstoy and stuff, he talks about the kingdom of heaven is within you. So the manifestation of that idea of that kingdom of heaven, then it needs action to be made manifest on earth. Britton also talks about religion, and remember, he was formerly an Episcopalian, which is connected to Anglicanism, the Church of England, which is connected to English nationalism, which the American revolutionaries opposed. And that religion can actually represent, on the one hand, truth, and many religious ideas and religious philosophies are capital T true. But at the other hand, religion can represent error. And, of course, Marx has talked about this dual character of religion. At once the sigh of the oppressed creature and a revolt against real suffering, and at the same time, the opiate of the masses. Britton places a lot of importance on the law of consequences, and this is, in New Thought, we talk about the law of cause and effect, and this is certainly, something puts something into motion, it causes sort of a chain reaction, and then effects result from that cause. It's also in chaos theory or Buddhist theory, they talk about, a butterfly flapping its wings in the east causes a tsunami in the west, or something like that. But he mentions that the Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher newspaper is devoted to, quote, general inquiry. And so this general inquiry is scientific and not bound to party or religious ideology. Scientific in the sense that it proceeds from objective first principles, right? And then accepts evidence as it comes in and proceeds from that. He says there is no attachment to any arbitrary system. So this offers a opportunity for revision of the old systems and revising them into something new and useful to human beings. And then he closes with an appeal to universal truth. And we can extrapolate from this idea of universal truth that it is anti-individualistic and anti the postmodern conception of truth that sees truth as individual. Right? There is a collective universal truth. And that's what we need to proceed from and to discover.
The signs of the times. The changes and events seen in nature or developed in the affairs of the world are usually preceded by certain visible signs, from which the philosophic mind is led to apprehend their approach. In the living realities of the present, the close observer may always discover the rudiments of that which is to come. The question that relates to the development of the future is not, in our judgment, a matter of mere curiosity or idle speculation. We regard it as one of peculiar interest, and so far as present appearances indicate the nature of coming events, it must be a subject of rational and profitable inquiry. We propose to answer two questions in this article, viz., what are the signs of the times? And what do these betoken as the events of the future? To render our remarks illustrative of the general subject, and connected with the present inquiry, we proceed to notice some of the prominent characteristics of the age, undeveloped in the existing condition of the world, and the general tendency of the human mind. A disposition to analyze all things presents itself as a peculiarity of the age. Whatever comes under observation must now pass the test of critical examination. Everything is resolved into its elemental principles. The spiritual, no less than the physical universe, the sphere of interior causes, as well as the world of external effects and visible phenomena, is subject to the most searching investigation. In the various branches of natural science, one theory or hypothesis has followed another, each possessing, in some degree, the evidences of increasing light and improvement. What one philosopher has conceived to be harmonious and truthful, has been rejected by his successor, who, uniting previous discoveries with personal observation and methodical arrangement, has embodied in a more pleasing form his own conceptions of the beautiful and the useful. These, in like manner, have failed to pass the ordeal of a still more refined taste and enlightened judgment. Thus the process is continually going on, and so rapid is the progress of light, that the theories of yesterday may possibly require, even now, to be adapted to the new discoveries and superior illumination of the present hour. The present time is distinguished for invention and discovery. Wherever the energies of man's mind are directed, his intellectual power is developed. This is discoverable in the numerous inventions in the mechanical arts. Man goes forth with a strong aim to perform his appointed mission in the world, and we are astonished at the comparative ease with which he accomplishes the most stupendous results. We have read the story of the old prophet who smote the waters with his mantle, and of Moses, who is said to have drawn the liquid element from the rock of the wilderness. But, making allowance for the legendary style of the record, we may not marvel at their deeds as though they were impossible wonders. For what is man doing now? There is no earthly power that can successfully oppose his progress. Obstacles only serve to facilitate his advance. He launches upon the great deep his domain, with tenfold swiftness, so that no isles of the ocean are unfamiliar to his eye as in the days of his childhood. Man puts forth his arm, and over mountain and valley the rivers are turned from their natural channels. The waters are brought to his service, and crystal fountains spring from the dusty streets of the crowded city. He converses with his friend almost instantly from one extremity of the land to the other. He has only to commission the invisible spirit that rides on the lightning's wing, to bear his thought 1,000 miles away. The greatest obstacles are removed, mountains leveled, and man has at least the hardihood to perform it. The work, indeed, were impossible if the elements which compose the earth were deprived of their ruling powers. Yet with iron bands the globe is bound together, and the invisible agents of nature are rendered subservient to the will of man, and made to minister to his wants. All this fills the mind with astonishment. They are notable miracles to him who is ignorant of the ways and the means by which they are accomplished. The intellectual activity and the rapid progress of man are seen in the scientific discoveries that have been made in the various branches of natural science, and in the general diffusion of knowledge. Here a broad field opens before us, to which the mental eye can discern no bounds. The philosopher labors with some degree of success to explore the great arcana of nature, to solve her profound problems, and to comprehend the laws which govern her vast and mysterious operations. Principles are being developed which have slumbered since the creation. The mists of ignorance and superstition, the cloud and terrible shadow of a long night, have been dissipated, and the morning of a new day has come. This is seen in the diffusion of the present system of common schools, and through the publishing of books, libraries, and the various societies for mutual improvement, which are doing much to develop the powers and to elevate the condition of man. These means are employed to break down the bulwarks of ignorance, and though this mighty engine is sometimes misdirected, still its action upon the world is, in the main, like the gradual raising up of the masses of mind. It is frequently wielded for selfish purposes, so that society is injured, individual hopes crushed, and the moral sense impaired. Yet, after all, it is a fountain whence living influences flow out in numberless channels, making the desert fruitful, and clothing the wilderness and solitary place with moral beauty. As society exists, all do not, and cannot, enjoy the advantages. But at no previous period in the world's history were the means of instruction within the reach of so many. Hence the general diffusion of knowledge must be regarded as a distinguishing feature of the age. To this we are mainly indebted for vast improvements in the state of society, government, and religion. Here we find the secret of the rapid growth and unrivaled prosperity of this great republic. Man is no longer satisfied with a mere animal existence. He claims a higher life. He has left the stagnant pool, enlivened by no murmur, to drink at the perennial mountain rill. He is refreshed, not by the turbid waters, but by the pure, ever-flowing living streams, and the cheering light of a brighter sun illumines his onward course. His faculties now open higher sources of enjoyment, continually expanding before him. His pleasures are increased in number, and more spiritual and divine. The world, existence, and the future are invested with new charms. The mists and fogs that blinded the early traveler have fled, and the day is at hand. I heard a voice, saying, "Let there be light," and behold, it is rolling in like a flood, leaving ungulfed no monument of darkness to tell of the night that is past. It was not our purpose to dwell upon the means or the evidences of progress separately and distinctively. It is only necessary to glance at these, that we may direct the reader's attention to the changes which their influence is destined to produce in the physical, social, intellectual, and religious condition of man. The present is, moreover, a time of benevolent effort. This is evident from the numerous charitable associations which are springing up all over the civilized world. Every institution which has for its object the amelioration of humanity is to be regarded as evidence of the truth of our proposition. These are so many ministers of mercy, employed to alleviate the sufferings of the poor and the oppressed. This benevolent spirit is indelibly impressed upon the literature of the age. It is seen in the great moral movements which distinguish the present era. It prompts every effort to abolish sanguinary laws, and is beginning to influence the administration of most modern governments. The general policy of all civilized nations is gradually assuming a more pacific character. Not that the war spirit is dead, we have melancholy evidence to the contrary in the present example of our country and Mexico. We shall leave to be read by the distant ages a fearful record inscribed in characters of blood and flame. Still, there is less cruelty in war in the world now, and the great essential harmony is more generally preserved, than in former times. We must not form our opinion here from an occasional outbreak of passion and riot in the midst of a dense population, nor from the fact that man still struggles for liberty and the exercise of his constitutional rights. These, under certain circumstances, may be the concomitants of his progress. But we are to remember, as essential to an enlightened judgment, that the love of war and the passion for martial glory are no longer the common impulse of man. He is now engaged in a nobler conflict. He is going forth to perform a more benevolent mission in the earth. There is a new and general movement of the elements. The social and religious world is now the theater of a mighty revolution, and we already discern the semblance of great events and important changes to come. What are the events which thus cast their shadows before? Our answer to this question must be brief. The political, social, and religious systems of the world will be changed. Human governments must undergo essential modification. In their structure and administration, the rights, interests, and happiness of all must be equally regarded. A government founded on the principles of distributive justice, and faithfully administered, would manifest the same fidelity in shielding the poor and lowly as in defending the possessions of the rich and great. Such a government does not now exist on the face of the earth. We have seen the utter inefficiency of all party political efforts and sectarian religious systems. These have failed to diminish the evil we seek to destroy. Henceforth, we are to employ other means. And we are assured that many enlightened minds and true hearts will be with us. A united, and we venture to hope, a well-directed and successful effort will be made to apply the principles of nature to the social system. In human society, as in the planetary world, in the general organization as well as in the individual body, each member has only to occupy its proper place and perform its appropriate office, and there will be a reciprocal and harmonious action. This cannot be realized while men are forced by an imperious necessity into positions which they are neither inclined nor qualified to occupy. It is in vain to expect that the conflicting elements of society will find their equilibrium under the present system. There must be a new order of external circumstances created, fitted to preserve the integrity of the weak and to reform the unworthy. In this way only can we rationally hope to allay this feverish excitement and equalize the action of the great body. Society must provide for the destitute and shield the poor wretched outcast, and thus remove the temptations which surround those unfortunate ones, or our preaching is vain, and we may despair of working out a better earthly destiny for the race. There are thousands who believe that a higher life is attainable, and if they are right, and we are faithful, something will be done to hasten the grand era when human society will exemplify the great harmony of the spheres. A similar change in the religious systems of the world is also necessary, and we believe inevitable. The old ideas in which we were educated, the dark mysteries and unfounded superstitions of a corrupt and fabulous theology, must pass away. Man may no longer invest the spirit of love with immortal hate, or fill the future with ever-wasting elements of destruction. The systems of government and religion founded on the prostrate rights of man must fall. These old forms must die. The indwelling divinity will not long quicken those worthless integuments. Its abiding place is not in the sepulchres among dead men's bones. It must, and will, go out to pervade and animate, with a diviner life, new and more congenial forms. Many will linger behind to weep over the old body, but the true disciple will still rejoice, and leaving the dead to bury their dead, follow the spirit in its heavenward flight. There are potent influences acting upon, and decomposing, these old systems. Every effort to promote peace and goodwill, every attempt to render man less vindictive and cruel in the infliction of punishment, is a blow aimed at the very foundation on which they rest. Not an instance of Christian forgiveness, not an effort to equalize labor and unite the discordant elements of society, but presents an argument against those exclusive and sectarian institutions which divide and distract the race. Every token of parental affection to an ungrateful child, every tear the mother sheds in secret for her wayward boy, the love of Christ for his enemies, the agony of the garden and the cross, and the struggles and sacrifices of every true reformer, proclaim in eloquent and powerful language the presence of a spirit that will not rest until man is redeemed, and the world is free. The time is at hand when the pure in heart and the free in spirit, of every name, must break over these sectarian lines and barriers, and meet together on the true ground of union. In that day a new impulse will move the heart of humanity, and a great light will shine in upon the imprisoned spirits of men. Those who worship a creed, whose religion is a set of opinions and ceremonies, may well tremble at the signs of the times. But to the great soul whose law is development, whose religion is spiritual growth and illumination, whose practice is a life of great thoughts and illustrious deeds, whose prayers are the struggles of the spirit to be free, the present is full of encouragement and hope. S.B.B.
So SBB, importantly, was Samuel Byron Britten, as we know. And this is his essay on the signs of the times. Seeing that the era, the epoch, was an important time in history. And it was the time of the market revolution. And that concept, that phrase, was not coined until much, much later. Actually, Charles Sellers, the historian, is credited with coining that phrase in the 90s. But this is clear that they saw it in the 19th century, that they were living through this revolutionary era of which Britain recalls invention and discovery, new scientific discoveries that would change the way they lived. He also talks a little bit about how this was a discourse or a dialectic of progress, that there was a thesis, antithesis, synthesis discourse going on between human progress and the old assumptions of civilization. Again, he, like John Murray Spear and his spirit guides, talks about the telegraph. He says that one can converse from one extremity to the other, and so individuals are bound together in space by this new technology. Again, this technology was a communalizing rather than individualizing technology against Weber's disenchantment individualization thesis. So it kind of is clear from this that John Murray Spear and other harmonians were maybe competitors in this new market of spiritual mediumship, which would maybe prefigure the spiritual medium business that would come, much later. But Britain talks about improvements and rapid growth in the economy as proof of progress. Again, capitalism is seen as progressive. Engels was also clear that the American situation was one that prefigured socialism. He especially talks about the Shakers, which I'm going to talk about with the Boston Shaker Group a little bit later in January of next year. But how Engels saw the Shakers as a model, a prefigurative model of the perfect socialist society. There are also parallels with Marx and what Britain says here, that capitalism, again, was progress over feudalism. Britain brings up the Mexican-American War in this, which Henry David Thoreau, the transcendentalist, opposed famously, and he wrote the Civil Disobedience essay based on his opposition to that war. That was, really probably one of America's first truly imperialist wars. I guess you could make a case that the Seminole Wars and the other wars against the Indians were earlier manifestations of manifest destiny, imperialism in the American situation. But this was, so, his idea that America represented progress was sort of undercut by the Mexican-American War in this situation. So he had to sort of make some arguments about that. But he says ultimately systems will be changed. There will be happiness for all, and there will be, importantly, distributive justice. So in this view, while America and its capitalist market revolution represented progress, socialism was something new. Socialism was the next step beyond this. And again, importantly, Britain calls for a new order of external circumstances. Importantly, he says external circumstances. So this revolution would not start from within, as many of the new thought people would later say. No, this revolution starts with external circumstances and then affects the individuals by the change in external circumstances. Again, going on Robert Owen's concepts that an individual's character is formed for them, not by them. And then he concludes by saying potent influences acting upon and decomposing these systems. So spirit was indeed acting upon these systems. Again, against individualism, there wasn't individual people making these choices, it was systems. And again, that spirit, though, was influencing these systems to a progressive cause. And we could say maybe prefiguring Gramsci's idea that, in our current era, maybe we could say it's even more relevant in 2025, that now is the time of monsters because the old world is dying and the new one is struggling to be born. So that is going to end our exploration of the Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher newspaper. For now, we're about halfway through the first article. So let me know what you thought of this. Did you like the sort of researcher's first impression takes? Was it interesting? Was it useful to you? Let me know. And maybe I'll continue with this series and go through the whole Univercoelum catalog. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just go through the rest of this newspaper and maybe the next one and the next one after that. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just stop this. But let me know what you think. Comment below. And thank you for listening. This is a parasocial experience, I know. But it's maybe an experiment in whether parasocial internet experiences can have some kind of spiritual utility and open up new avenues for inquiry, new avenues for reason. And so keep listening and comment if you liked it. And if you didn't, comment also. Thanks.